And one of the interesting things you may not yet have seen is the ability to bring your EFB flight information out of the game and into a browser, any browser. So I have my phone here, which I have attached to my yoke at all times. I could put my flight information from the game directly on here via my website browser, which is an extremely cool improvement. And I know there are a lot of bugs and issues with the game. Some people are jumping all over it, but what they're trying to do, I have to just sort of give them a bit of leniency, because they are trying to do something so far ahead of any other flight sim. So I'll give them a bit of time and whatnot. They coded themselves into a corner with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, and everything that we wanted them to do there, they couldn't, because they coded themselves into this corner. They're already showing their ability to learn from their mistakes and do a much better job, and I think it's just incredible, absolutely incredible what they've done. Today what we're going to be focusing on is controller setup, throttle setup, rudder pedal setup, and most importantly dual configuration setup. So there are people like me with two yokes which are identical, but there are other people with, say, Cytec throttle quadrants, so you have two of those, and it's difficult at the moment to identify what they are. I'll discuss all of this in detail as we go through. Hello guys, how you doing? Welcome to the Sim Shack, and of course welcome back to me, Sim UK. Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. Finally, it would appear that the launch issues have subsided, at least mostly, and everybody can get access to the game, but then you're presented with your next problem, which is configuration and setting up. So I thought I'd put a video together today and try and figure it out together what exactly is going on. Now you can see from my system here, I've got a Honeycomb Alpha yoke and a second Honeycomb Alpha yoke as my co-pilot's input. I've also got a Bravo yoke here. I've got a touchpad, keyboard and mouse combined. This makes my life a little bit easier to have it accessible there. And I also have an Xbox 360 controller. Underneath the desk I've got foot pedals, and well, if you know me, my rudder pedals at the moment, I can't use them properly because behind that I've got a Helicopter Collective and a brand new joystick from Wing, the Orion 2, which I'm going to have to configure and set up. But today, in addition to that, I have other HOTAS and systems and stuff and so on. But today we're going to focus on using this stuff. I've also got the Cytec autopilot radio panel configured here, and the Logitech, I say Logitech, it's really a Cytec info panel up on the top here as well. I'm not going to focus on those because that's a whole different subject, and apparently, so I've heard, it doesn't work too well with those at the moment, so that'll take some testing. In addition to that, and you may see on the camera up here, this is a touch screen. So I won't be doing anything touchscreen related. This monitor here is also touchscreen, and this is where my GPS will be. That again will be a different video altogether. Okay, so let's get into it. The first thing you need to do is come up here to the top right. You've got this little icon, little cog icon, and that'll take you into the game settings. First of all, we're going to scroll right across to controls and select this. And this is where we're going to be working today, is in this area. Now, before I get into too much detail, it's really quite important that I explain to you some of the limitations of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. The issue we started getting as more and more third-party aircraft came in were that specific aircraft have specific controls that don't apply to every single aircraft. And that was causing some serious problems in numerous ways. One of the most serious issues was name configuration. So a button in an aircraft would be called one thing, and the button that replicates it in the control panel would be called something else. So trying to marry the two up was quite difficult, and that was furthermore confounded by the fact that sometimes you had duplicates. So you would have the button in the aircraft would have two different input available in the control panel, both with different names. You can see how this would very quickly become confusing and frustrating. Furthermore, you would often find that there are aircraft with specific button controls, and there would be nothing in the configuration panel to accommodate that. So what Microsoft have done is add a specific control section. So whereas before we used to have a single control sheet for each device, now we have a single control sheet for each aircraft, but it's split into 3 parts. Okay, so I'm just going to spend a few minutes really homing in on this so that you get absolutely crystal clarity, because this is the fundamental change here. So previously what happened was a controller would have a control sheet, and that control sheet would be used on any plane, helicopter, any device, any kind of DLC or third-party element that you would bring into the game would be controlled via that single control sheet. What's going to happen now is that each plane can have its own dedicated sheet for each controller. So if an airplane has a different configuration, let's say for example Boeing aircraft have the toga button, whereas Airbus planes do not have a toga button, then that would be a specific controller set up just for planes with Boeing, and you will be able to go in and set each of those. But they've broken it down even more than that, which is actually fantastic. What we've got here at the top is what's called general controls. So general controls relate to everything outside of the aircraft, walking around, changing camera, all that kind of good stuff. Airplane controls literally relate to inputs that you use to fly the plane. Buttons you press, dials you twist, axes and levers that you pull and push, etc. That's all in there and nowhere else. Then, like the toga for example, although that's a bad example as I'll show you later on, if a plane has specific controls that no other plane has, a third-party input that has its own dedicated controls will have a specific sheet added with the plane that will stay with the plane. That you can edit and change none of these, but you can copy them and edit them yourself. I'll show you all of this in a minute. I know it sounds a bit confusing, and I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. Let's just have a quick look up here. Previously, you couldn't select an aircraft when you were setting up your controllers, but now you could select helicopter, plane, glider, lighter than air devices, and other. Other can be anything. We'll get spaceships in here, we'll get flying lawnmowers, all sorts of craziness. But they're all going to have their own bespoke setup configuration. There's a filter at the bottom. You can look at all the assigned devices, and you'll see that all of these inputs now have information about them. These are all airplanes. Digital means a button. Analog means a lever or an axis or an input. But they all relate to airplane. And that's here. This is airplane controls here, this section. We scroll down a little bit. I think I saw one there. General. So this is toggle flashlight. That's got nothing to do with aeroplanes. That happens outside of the aeroplane, and that'll be here in general controls. Now, I very much suspect there isn't going to be a specific... I haven't found one yet. I think we'll probably find them only on third-party aircraft. But if there is a third-party element, then this will say, I don't know, specific probably. And then you'll have a specific control just for that airplane. And it will all save itself. This airplane will have 3 inputs controlling This one is the only one that controls the plane, but anything you do whilst you're in that plane or associated with that plane will be kept in these 3 files. And trust me, this is a million times better than it was in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. Don't worry, I will discuss all of this and I will show you how it all works. And at the end of this, I promise you, you'll have this completely under control. I'll say that again slowly because I don't want to confuse you. So the aircraft has 1 control sheet, but it's split into 3 parts. I hope that makes sense. One of the most frustrating things about the new 2024, other than the fact that this is a bit convoluted and confusing at first look, is if I now press that button, you'll see that this doesn't go white. Now in 2022, if I press that button, it would flick white and flick off. So it should be flicking between the two, 13 and 14, as I do it. And that really helps, because then you can identify that you could be absolutely sure that the button you think is doing a job is doing the job. And they've taken that away. That was probably the only good thing about 2020, and they've removed it, and it's a real disappointment. So I really hope Asobo will watch this video, realise what a mistake that is, and put that back in. Same thing applies if you use any sort of Axis input. It used to show up, but now it doesn't. And not only did it show up previously, but also you could see how accurate it was. So if that's 100%, you would be able to see the bar would have gone all the way across and all the way back again, and that would have been perfect. So let's just go into hardware settings a second so you can see that. But once again, I'm moving that axis and nothing is happening. You can't see any kind of input whatsoever. It's just a dead screen, and that's just awful. I'm assuming this is a bug. I don't know though. I'll have to keep an eye on that and see what happens. So each controller point here, you've got your keyboard, you've got your touch pointer, which is this thing here. I've got my Bravo throttle quadrant. I've got my Alpha flight control, my second Alpha flight control, my Cessna pedals, and track IR. Now, let's focus on the dual devices first. One thing you'll notice immediately is that they have exactly the same name. And that is a bit of a problem. So, coming back to airplane controls, we do have this default Alpha Flight Control 2024 planes configuration. So the Alpha Flight Controls is a uneditable pre-configured file created by Microprose or Asobo specifically for this joystick. If I try and make a change here, like adding button 14, it will force me to create a new profile. Now that's what I did before, which is why I have a pilot and co-pilot base. So I know that the co-pilot base refers to my second yoke over here. Now the interesting thing is that they've configured set alternator to button 13, which on this joystick is, I think, pressing up. Sometimes that mouse doesn't disappear. There we go. It takes time. The pushing up is button 13, but it doesn't recognize that because the button needs to be pressed and released in order to be activated. So you press it, then you have to unpress it. That's how buttons are input in here. If I just press it one way and then go off and do something else, it just cancels it. I try and change it to 14. The scan is cancelled, goes back to the original. If you want to delete it, you press the delete key. You press the back key on the keyboard, sorry. But it's a bit of a concern that, because if you click on that and try and delete it, it won't let you because it thinks you're using the wrong device. You have to hover over it and delete it, which I think could possibly lead to accidental deletion. So just be careful of that. If we just come in here and use the search filter and type in alternator, you'll see that we're only getting one up here, but if we change the filter to none, so there's no filter, it will show us all of the alternator button inputs that are available. Now, what's interesting about this is that in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, quite often this wouldn't work very well. You would type in alternator, but you wouldn't see all the inputs. So it looks like they've put quite a bit of effort into fixing this. You can see these are all the aircraft that are available to us. We'll go to aeroplane. And I can see I've got a lot more aircraft in here now. The other day, it didn't load up with hardly any. In fact, the Cessna 172 Skyhawk was completely missing. And if we scroll down, you'll see that SimUK is already preset for that aircraft. Because I came in here and I set it as default. Now, as default, let's check it. Let's check it again. Go to helicopters, a totally different interface. Save and back. You can see that it hasn't saved that because helicopters and aeroplanes are two completely different interfaces, and that is such a positive change to have that dynamic difference between each aircraft and each aircraft type. I imagine, let's come in here, you can see we've got an awful lot more buttons here for alternator. Let's do the same thing here. Let's change it again. So sorry, I just touched something with my knee. Damn it, that's the wrong one now. On and off. It forces me to put a new profile in, so you can see this is a helicopter. So I'll type in here sim space UK space heli, and we will apply to all aircraft and press OK. This is a much better interface once you get used to it, but it doesn't behave exactly like you would expect it to. Right, so now we have a SimUK heli interface, exactly the same configuration setup. Quite frankly, I won't be flying helicopters with this configuration setup. It just doesn't make any sense. But if we now swap the aircraft, remember I set that to all aircraft but not default, and come back, see by default SimUK heli. I click here, you can see it can be applied to all aircraft, but it can't be set as default. So I'm still unclear at this moment in time what the difference between default and set to all aircraft is, but we'll try and figure that out as we go through this tutorial. So let's swap again. Let's go to something that's lighter than air, a hot air balloon, for example. Save and come back. You can see once again that has changed. So let's come in here. Let's go alternator, hit enter, and you can see a lot less options, but still the same basic configuration. Now I'm making a change to the default setup. This is the setup that comes free with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. So because we've changed it, these are non-editable. So I'm going to put in here Sim UK, and I'll make these available for you once I've set them up if you like. LTA, let's go again. LTA, lighter than air, and I'm going to set as default, and we'll say OK. So SimUK LTA. So let's swap. Different air balloon, but still in the air balloon department. And what have we got? SimUK lighter than air. Go to helicopter. Sim UK heli. Go to the aeroplane. So now that's set to Sim UK. So if we, for example, change the aircraft and go to glider, we should be back to the default. So there it is, the alpha flight controls. And I'm not sure what's in other, probably spaceships and like, oh yeah, gyrocopters and all sorts of weird things like this. We'll come in here, we'll do the same thing. Alternator. Enter. That gets the thing out of there. Now I can delete the input. It's going to force me to change it. So Sim UK base other. And we shall apply that to all aircraft as set as default, and we'll say OK. And then we'll come up here, pick a different one, and it should be Sim UK other, as you can see. And let's go to glider, and that should still. Oh yes, did we put one in for glider? I don't think we did we? So let's do one for glider. Get rid of that one. Forces us to create a new profile. Sim UK glider. That's slightly irritating. If you've made a typo in there, you can't go back and change it. So you're going to have to come all the way back. Put it in properly. Like a grown-up would. And again, we'll apply to all aircraft and set as default. In fact, let's untick those and say OK. So now we've got Sim UK glider on the DG Aviation LS818, but let's swap now to the DG1001E. And you'll see that it hasn't by default bound that to anything. If I come through, put Sim UK glider, and I say set as default. Now that might set default just for this aircraft. That's what I'm thinking. If we go to the stem, what have we got? Yeah, okay. So I don't really understand the difference between apply to all aircraft and set as default. For me, they're the same thing. That's all. I can't differentiate between the two of them. I've tried. Now, I could clear a setup. If we come in here and I say alternator again, I come in here and I clear it. Bindings and sensitivity settings for the input profile Sim UK glider on the H Alpha flight control device will be cleared. Do you want to continue? And I'll say OK. And what that's done is it's wiped all the inputs for that setup. Completely wiped them. We could always go back to the default controller, and if we add one in now, it will force us again to create a new profile. So let's try putting in same name. We won't do either of these. We'll just say okay. Oh, actually, I didn't mean to do that. Apologies. Let's delete that one. So now you know what that does. But Sim UK glider. So alternator on. Oh, no. Alpha flight controls. So we're going to delete that one. And we're going to save it as Sim UK glider. And hit OK. So what that's done now is it's just overwritten. In fact, it hasn't overwritten the Sim UK glider. It has created two of them. Just to prove this, I'll delete that one. We still have 𝙎𝙤 glider. Let's go in here. The 𝙎𝙤 glider has nothing set for alternator. So if we just use alternator for the time being, just to make things easier, we'll come into the flight controls and I'll add a new input. Forces me to create a new one. 𝙎𝙤 glider. We'll set default and apply to all aircraft, and we'll hit OK. And you can see that 𝙎𝙤 glider has those inputs up there. But we've also got a second 𝙎𝙤 glider that has no inputs at all. So it doesn't overwrite any previous controller that you had. It just changes to whatever it's set to. Same thing applies up here if you want to create any sort of input here. So let me just get rid of that. Oh, try it again. So now that's configured properly. 𝙎𝙤 glider. Should we go to the dead one? That's got nothing in it. We'll delete that. Equally, if I go to 𝙎𝙤 glider and I duplicate, on this occasion it will force me to rename it. So I don't know whether that ability to create two things with the same name is going to survive, or whether that's a bug, or whether that's a feature that they're going to remove later on, or keep. Maybe it is useful, who knows. One thing I haven't discussed up here is the inputs here. So you've got input repetition. This gives you great control over something. So let's say, for example, I have a button here on top. So let's say I want to use that to drop a bomb. But what I want to do is I want to press down, which arms the bomb, and then only when I release will it drop the bomb. A bomb is a bad example in Microsoft Flight Simulator because at the moment, at least, there are no weapons allowed in the game. Watch this space. So yeah, you've got quite a bit of control here. Input repetition, yes or no, so you can turn that off. So in the instance here where I turn the alternator on, that will send a signal once to the game, say turn it on, but it won't say turn it on, 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 turn it on. Now the difference there, it's something I'll have to play around with, but the way that they had it set up was that if it was up, then it was on. So whether or not it needs to stay with input repetition, constantly saying on, or let's say button 13. So it's shouting at the game, button 13, button 13, button 13, in order to keep that switch up is unclear. That's going to take a bit more play and control. But if you want to get more, I mean really seriously into your controls, then this is where you would do it. So that just swaps between primary and secondary. And when I say primary and secondary, what I mean is this is your primary and this is your secondary in this list. You could, if you want, have two completely different buttons to set this up, but still bound to this controller and that aircraft, or potentially that aircraft, because you can share it with all aircraft, of course, or not, if the case may be. So let's say you've got some specific controls for your glider. For example, the release catch for the cable that tows the glider before you take off. Let's say you've got a specific input like that. So let's clear alternator for a minute. We'll come down here and we will change the filter to essential. Now this is all essential inputs, irrespective of whether or not they've been bound or not at all. So let's have a look see here at flight control surfaces. You can see we've got 3 groups, and this is where it starts to get a bit clunky. It looks a bit busy in here. When you start opening these up, all of a sudden you've got quite a lot of inputs. Now, like I say, before, when you put input on a device, you can see those ailerons, elevators, axes rather, is not moving at all. Which is, I think, a bit of a shame, because it just really helps you not only identify which device you're currently on, but confirms to you and conveys to you that the device is A, configured the way you want it, and B, working the way you want it. So I'm hoping they bring that back, because that was actually a good feature of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. So here we have lots of glider specific inputs. You can see digital axes, etc, etc. So let's not use that. Let's come back out of there. Have a look. Tools, maybe it's in tools. No, not that one. So you can press escape to go back as well, if you so wish. Let's have a think. Liquid drop system. Okay, so gliders, I don't know if you know, have like a water tank ballast sometimes, not all times, but sometimes. It can help them have a smoother flight, fly a further distance. But when you come into land, generally, the rule of thumb is to release that water so that you're lighter, and then landing is more comfortable and less bumpy or whatever. That's the theory behind it. But this liquid drop system probably doesn't exist in the aeroplanes at all. Now, having said that, there is a fire plane that drops water. So whilst this is called toggle spray, let's go have a look at an airplane. I'm not sure which one it is. I'm hoping it's bright orange or something. Is it that one? No, that's the Grumman Goose. Could it be that one? There's water capacity, 0 pounds. I'm guessing it's not that one. Let's just save and go back. And I think it was called spray, wasn't it? We've got toggle spray, set spray, spray on, spray off. Whereas in the glider... So, okay, slightly different naming convention. But what they've done now is they've separated those. So you've got glider controls and you've got aircraft controls, just to prove that. Oh. Must forget. Select one. That's one area that I'm still working on, is remembering to click on it. It's still in essential, and you can see that these spray inputs are glider specific. So if I set something on there for gliders to toggle spray, it's not going to affect the aeroplane or vice versa. So when you come out of the entire configuration, you have a save and back option. Again, it's very quick, much quicker than it was in 2020, a much faster process, which is really great to see. Now, we have a bit of an issue here, so let's go back into this and... Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to search by input. This is another option we have. So on the alpha yoke, you have an ignition key. So if I click on search by input and then press and release it, that ignition, what I would look for ignition, is actually called magneto start. So this joystick has a magneto start, and sorry, this yoke has a magneto start, and this yoke has a magneto start. Now, obviously, they're on different devices. So now I've switched between the two. You'll notice that it still has the same input. So and that's because I'm trying to change the default setup. But that's actually really cool. So when you're doing dual setup and you're working on a specific thing, you can swap between the devices. Again, that's a huge improvement over Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. That really does streamline and increase the speed of things. Now, the question is, if this one is turned off and this one is turned on, which one has control? Let's do a free flight. Let's just grab the 152, one of my favourite starter aircraft. Oh, I missed it. Where was it? I'll tell you what, let's go in the A5. Now, I've had all sorts of problems with this previously, but hopefully it'll work now. So Sandown, Isle of Wight. I'll set this as arrival as well. There you go. Just going to do a round robin. We'll start the flight.
Echo Golf Hotel November traffic icon golf. Whiskey Mike Alpha Zulu taking off runway 22 departure to the west.
There we go. There we go. So you can see, now I had this problem before and I didn't figure it out, and actually one of my viewers highlighted to me, did you work out the ignition issue? Now, I knew that I had my ignition on in that flight that I did, where I was putting input in and nothing was working. So the issue is, okay, let's remove the parking brake. So the issue is that the input over here is off. So that has overwritten this one. So if I come in here and start the engine, how do I look down? So you can see my ignition is off. Okay. Now I'm trying to turn that ignition. Do you see how it's fighting against me? That's as far as I can get. I can get to left. But when I go to both, it switches back to off. And the reason for that is because this one is off. If I switch that one to both, and then try and turn this one on, so, and it's not necessarily a bug, is it? Let's be honest. There should only really be one ignition in the aircraft. So the fix to this, in my mind at least, is to go settings, controls, and again, this is so much faster than it was before. Right, so what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're on this controller over here. What would be great is if I could rename this. If I could rename the input device. I think that would fix a lot of the confusion that I have as to which one is which. But anyway, let's come in here and just type in Magneto. You can see. Now again, wouldn't it be useful if as I turn the triggers, it lights up on there and then I know which one is which. But fundamentally, you should only have one ignition in an aircraft. So what we just want to do is we want to remove this. Bosh. Oh, hang on. That didn't force me. So that's already on Sim UK. Let's delete Sim UK. Let's go to the default. And then I'll get rid of these. So off. New profile. sim UK pilot. Will apply to all aircraft and set it as default for this device. So I think setting as default for this device. I get it. I think I've just clicked it actually. So when you set as default, you make this profile default for this joystick. When you set to all aircraft, it just shares that file with all aircraft. I think that clears that up. Right, so that is all magnetos over here turned off. So this one is off, that one is off, and we'll restart the flight. And what should happen, actually I'll turn this back to both. What should happen now is that aircraft shouldn't turn off. It should stay on.
Echo Golf Hotel November traffic icon Golf. Whiskey Mike Alpha Zulu taking off runway 22 departure to the west.
You can see that it's still on. So if I now turn this off, in fact, if I change this, nothing happens because I've unbound it. Okay, that's now fixed. I'm never going to have that problem again. And thank you so much to that viewer who highlighted that to me. I said I'd have a look at it, and this is me having a look at it right now. So it's all now controlled on one device. Now what's interesting is, and there may be a little bit of a bug there. So we're on both, which is what basically starts. That's what you would fly with. But when you're testing, I have left, which now to me looks like it's on the right one. And then if I go to right, it then goes back to both. Okay, that's both. That's right. Oh, okay. Oh, it doesn't line up very well. It is accurate, but so we've got left and right on here, but here they've got both. So that's both. That's meant to be left, and that's meant to be right. So they're actually back to front in terms of this particular aircraft. So let's have a look at this, shall we? Let's see if we can fix this little problem, and by doing so explain how the settings work just a little bit more detailed. We'll go to controls. So fundamentally on this yoke, the left and right are wrong. What I want to do is create a specific A5 control here. Now I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. So what I need to do let's get rid of that. So I already know I've got a better setup. We've got a co-pilot. Get rid of this one. And I'll go from the default. Okay. Let's go to magnetos. Just press enter. So magneto left, let's put it on secondary just so we can see it. So magneto left should be that. That's going to force me to create a new profile, of course. We'll say Sim UK shift. Oh. Pilot A5. So this is specifically for the A5, because I don't know if this is going to be every single aircraft that needs to have this swapped around, or whether it's just this one. So for now I'll set this as default for this aircraft only. Press OK. So, SimUK pilot A5. So, Magneto's left, according to that, is on 33. So, in my humble opinion, it depends on whether you consider A to be left or B to be left. But I say that's back to front from what I'm seeing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that. So I'm going to change that to be button 32. And then I'm going to change button 32 to be left. Then I'll get rid of that one. So see how much faster this is than 2020. It's incredible. Right, so let's go back. Save and back. So that's now saved. We'll resume the flight. So now we have off. Right should be A. Left should be B. Both should be both. And start engine is start engine. So there you go. We've now fixed that for this aircraft. Let's take it to the next level, shall we? Let's go for the next aircraft. And the loading times, the initial loading time is awful. I think we'll all agree to that. But how much quicker is the transition here than it used to be in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020? This game is ticking so many boxes for me. I know it's got one or two issues, but it's ticking so many boxes for me. It's ridiculous. Let's go in the 152 because we need wheels and not floats. So unfortunately, that's removed my input. That's okay. We'll just put them in again. Right. So I'm going to keep it on both so that we'll see whether or not this impacts, because that's turned to off, and we'll see whether the configuration we've set up is available for this aircraft.
Papa Victor, Hotel Lima, taking off runway 22 west departure.
As you can see, that has not affected this aircraft because we set it to all. Now, this does have a right and a left, and you'll notice, interestingly, that right and left, if you think about it, are actually the wrong way round. But that is how it's set up on the yoke as well. So the yoke, I think, is designed based on the Cessna. So, let's try it. There's the start, there's the both, there's the left, and there's the right. So that perfectly matches what I've got on the key, but this is the thing. This is why I wanted to show you how the configuration works like this. If we come in here onto our controller, type in Magneto. You can see that Magneto left is 33, which is what it was originally. So if we come down here, you see that the default configuration is correct. And the A5 pilot is the other way around. So 32, 33. We had to swap them for the A5 pilot in order to make it sync up correctly. And now we've got an A5. We've got the co-pilot. That's irrelevant for this controller. The default is fine. Or we could just create a new one here. So if we go wash like that, click on here, duplicate. So that means we haven't made any changes, but we've created a new profile for ourselves. So Sim UK pilot. Oops. So I want to set as default, and I want to apply to all aircraft. I'm going to just check this out a second. So I want this to basically, every time I load into an aeroplane, again, this wasn't available in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. When I load into an aircraft, I want it to immediately default my input configuration to be the one I want. So I'm going to apply this to all aircraft and set as default. In fact, yes, I'm going to do that. Okay, so now the default is 𝙎𝙤 pilot, which means that the left and the right will be the wrong way round for the A5. I hope you're following me and I'm not losing you. But if we swap back to the A5, that should now have set the A5 default to be 𝙎𝙤, which is not what we want. Hang on, why can't I click on this? Oh, I can't change it because I'm... Okay. We go to main menu. And the speed at which this game now transitions is beautiful. That in itself is a huge improvement. Right, so the 152 defaults to 𝙎𝙤 pilot with the ignition key set the way that it's defaulted to be set. Actually, I didn't realise we could just go A5. Makes life a little bit easier. Now this should say 𝙎𝙤 pilot. It doesn't. It says 𝙎𝙤 pilot A5. Ah, so that's interesting. So when you have a configuration set up and you set it across the board, it won't override another aircraft that has a default already. We'll see in here that 𝙎𝙤 pilot is in the list, but we're not using that for this plane. For this plane, we have the A5 variant where the key ignition has been adjusted to mimic what's happening on the key. It's a small thing, but I tell you what, to do that in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 would have been an absolute nightmare. So this is much better. So much better on so many levels. Okay, so let's go. Let's swap back to the 152. And this one should default to pilot, 𝙎𝙤 pilot. Is the A5 in there? The A5 is in there, but it defaults to pilot. Okay, so that's good. That's what we want. Whoops. And then I'm just going to go to an airplane that we haven't been in before. The one, in fact, let's go into this one here. Doesn't really matter which one, but it should default to pilot because that's what we've set. Oh, it hasn't. Interesting. And I can't set that as default. Still a little bit of working out going on here. Just bear with me. So now it's defaulted to 𝙎𝙤 pilot. Okay. Let's go to another plane that we haven't been in and see what that defaults to. You can do this a few times as a test. We'll go to the longitude and we'll see what that's defaulted to. That's defaulted to this as well. Now that's interesting. I have the option to set that to default, which means, in my head at least, that that is not the default. So I think that might be a bug. I think it's meant to be this. I'm just trying to think how I can force this to be set to default. Let's apply that to all aircraft. Let's come in here and let's change something. Battery. Let's do battery. Oh. This device does not take double taps particularly well. You have to be a bit slower. We've got set master battery here, whereas I can just go set battery 1. It shouldn't master, but there we go. Master battery on. Try that again. Master battery off. So again, oops, swapping this out from what the default is to my new setup. So I've changed that. I still can't set it as default, but I can apply it to all aircraft. So I'm wondering, I'll tell you what we could do. Let's set this to A5. So now the default for the longitude is A5. If I set it to pilot, then that should now be the default. Actually, let's try this. Let's set it to A5. Swap it to SimUK pilot. Come out of it completely. Come back in and see what it's set to. So it stayed on pilot, even though I set A5 as the default. So we'll set SimUK pilot as the default, and then we'll swap it to A5, and we'll come out, go back in. So I get the distinct impression whatever you leave it on will become the new default, irrespective of what you set as default. So this won't be A5 now. This will be pilot this time, yeah. But if we go to the A5 should still be A5, because that's what we left it on when we left last. Yeah. So again, I imagine possibly that's a bug. If you don't set it as default but you change it here, it seems that whatever you leave it on here is what it will default back to. Okay, so I've done some research on this, found absolutely nothing on it. So I'm going to stick my neck out and say, if for example you have a PMDG aircraft, and I do actually have a PMDG for Microsoft Flight Simulator, I'm not sure whether it's transferred over yet. So my PMDG aircraft doesn't appear to have copied over yet, but I suspect that that's what that is. So according to this, there are no essential inputs for the Boeing 747. Let's swap to the A5 again. You can see this time all of this comes up in essential. So there are some bugs, there are some issues in it itself, but fundamentally, hopefully, I've been able to show you the key elements of it and get you up and running. I mean, you should be fine from this point in, I would think. Any questions, just let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.